Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Good Grief Life After Loss. I am your host, Skylar, and today's episode is an episode that I have known I was going to have to record from day one of this podcast, but I have definitely been putting it off for a long time. And that is because today is the day where I am finally sharing the story of losing my brother Sam. And this is a story that very, very few people have ever heard in its entirety. I have told this story a few times, only during grief group at the high school. That's really honestly the only place where I've had both the opportunity and felt comfortable enough to share this story. And for the past 10 years, I have talked about grief and growth, about what I've learned along the way, but I think it's important now, as I am the host of this podcast and as I'm building this audience, to sit down and walk all of you through that time in my life that changed everything. And I know for a lot of people, it is one day where their whole life changed. For me, it was pretty much a month. So this is a long story, and it is not an easy story to tell. I don't think it's going to be an easy story to listen to. Some parts are still very raw. There are some details I know I will never forget, even if I wish I could, and no matter how many years go by, I think they will stay with me forever. But my hope is that by sharing my story, someone out there listening will feel less alone in theirs, because that is exactly what grief group did for me. Even though no one's story was identical to mine, there were little bits and pieces where I felt like finally someone feels the same, or someone understands, or someone also went through this experience. So I want to be vulnerable and share my story with all of you in hopes that it helps, but also because as listeners, the story of what I went through losing my brother Sam is so important to know when it comes to all of the other conversations that I want to be having with you about my grief journey. So I am really hoping that this is the safe space, the safe community that I've tried so hard to build. And I think this is going to be a tough episode for me to record, no doubt, and it's going to be a tough one to listen to. So I just ask for your respect when listening to this story, and definitely probably don't be listening to this one at your desk or with other people today. I think this is a time to maybe go on a walk and just listen to this episode with yourself. But with all of that being said, let's dive into my story of losing my older brother Sam. All right, so for a little background context, this story takes place in September of 2015. Sam had just a few months ago won first place at the Junior Nationals. He was a nationally ranked men's skier, maybe internationally ranked men's freestyle skier. He was just at the top of his game. He was incredible, and he was only 16 years old, and he was ranking above men over 18. And he was really just at his peak doing what he loved. And at that time, Sam had also transferred schools to the winter school, which is a school in Park City that is pretty much reverse timeline of a normal school. So they go to school during the summer so that in the winter they are on break and have the time to pursue their passion, which is the winter sport. So you could go there for skiing or snowboarding or ice skating or whatever it is. And that was a big decision for Sam to go to the winter school, but ultimately it made perfect sense that his lifelong dream was to become a professional skier, and he couldn't just keep missing school. He had to really commit to it. So Sam was thrilled to be at the winter school. He was with all of his friends. They were skiing every day. And come September, Sam had the opportunity to travel with his ski team to Australia for a 10-day ski training trip, because while it had not snowed yet in the US, it was winter in Australia. So it was a perfect opportunity to go and have a ski trip to kick off their season. And I just remember Sam was so excited about this. He was thrilled about the opportunity to be skiing with the kangaroos, and he was just really excited for this trip. And the day that he left to go to Australia, the last day I ever spoke to Sam, I remember I was running out the door to go to soccer practice. A friend and her mom were picking me up, and as I was running out the door, Sam was in the driveway, and he was shirtless in like pajama pants playing basketball. And at this point in time, Sam had always been a very like skinny, scrawny kid. I think my mom used to call him like string bean and mini corn. Because he was just seriously so skinny, and he decided like enough was enough. He wanted to get stronger, so he had for like the past few months really gotten into serious like weightlifting and weight training, and he had a gym coach, and he was drinking protein shakes, and he was just really into that. So over the past few months of his life, his body got so much stronger and made that physical transformation. And so I remember running out past him in the driveway and looking at him, and he was just like jacked. And so I said, "Damn, he's got abs." And he looked at me as I was running out in my soccer uniform, looked at my legs and said, "Damn, she's got calves." And we both laughed. And I think my mom came out and was like, "This is the last time you're seeing Sam before he comes back from Australia. Give him a hug." And so, as reluctant siblings do, we hugged each other, very side huggy, and I ran into the car, and later that night is when he left for the airport. And that was the last time I saw Sam, I'm going to say alive, I guess. And I'm very happy that that was our last interaction, honestly. It was just like a wholesome, sweet sibling moment. And I think as anyone who has siblings know, it could so easily have been the opposite scenario of us bickering or fighting or yelling or teasing or whatever. And it just was like a really sweet, wholesome moment. So for that, I am very thankful. And yeah, Sam left for Australia. He was having the absolute time of his life. Really, like, I think he was just having such a blast. And when we looked back and saw like footage and pictures and videos from those first few days in Australia, it is just so clear he was just living his best life. He was in heaven. He was so happy. And about, I think 5 days into his 10-day ski trip is when everything changed. I remember it was early evening, like maybe just after dinner time. I remember laying in bed at my mom's house, scrolling on my phone, and all of a sudden hearing the most gut-wrenching, just like blood-curdling scream come from our basement, and it was coming from my mom. And I immediately jumped out of bed, freaked out at why could anyone be screaming that way in the house. And I ran to the door and I put my hand on the handle, and then remember like having this weird second thought of like second guessing, like, wait, should I go out there? I don't know. And it wasn't the scream of like, I just twisted my ankle on the stairs or there's a giant bug. Like, it was a scream where I knew like, oh, something is really, really wrong and really, really bad. And I hesitated to open the door, and I just remember pressing my ear to the door, hearing my mom screaming, and eventually her screams turned into just like sobbing uncontrollably. And she came up the stairs past my room and was in her bedroom crying. And I just remember being so scared to open that door because I knew whatever it was that caused her to scream like that was so horrible. And I went into her bedroom and said, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she didn't respond. She was just sobbing. And I put my hand on her and said, "Mom, like, please tell me what happened." And she just like through her tears said, "Sam was in an accident and they don't think he's gonna make it." And that was just the most surreal moment of like not fully understanding, what does that mean? How do we know this? How bad is it? And of course, she didn't know any of those answers at the time either. And I just crawled into bed with my mom and remembered like hugging her from behind and trying to rub her arm and console her. And she was just so distraught and so upset. And I think I was confused, didn't fully understand. And within, 20 minutes, my dad was over at the house. And important information, my parents were divorced at this time. They'd been divorced for over 10 years at the time of this, I think. So they've always had a very good relationship. We've always lived very close. They've always been close. They always have talked like all the time. They were very open communicators about us as kids. But obviously, I think this is nothing divorced parents want to deal with and handle together. But my dad was at the house within 20 minutes, and it turns out he had been grocery shopping at Whole Foods when he got the call from one of Sam's coaches. And it was at some like absurd time in Australia that didn't make sense for them to be calling. And his coach pretty much explained that on the last run of the day, of course, Sam went off one of the jumps that he had gone off dozens of times on this trip, and just for some unknown reason completely over-rotated, overshot his landing, and launched off this jump. And when he landed on his head. And I don't need to get into the details of the injury or the accident, but it was really, really bad. And I think for any of his coaches and teammates that were there to witness, I just cannot even imagine how traumatizing it is to have to see your best friend in that situation. Anyways, he was immediately life-flighted. He was skiing at the Perisher ski resort in Australia. He was immediately life-flighted and taken to the Canberra hospital. And I don't know the exact details, but they pretty much said like he is hanging on by a thread. He has been placed in a medically induced coma, and you need to get here to say goodbye because he is not going to make it much longer. Yeah. Obviously nothing any sibling or parent ever wants to hear about their brother and their child. And I just remember it being so terrifying of like, we have to get to Australia, and what if we do not get to Australia on time? And of course, the other side of me was thinking, like, what if we get there and he's awake and better? And this was all some big mistake and they overreacted. Obviously, that's not the case because I have this podcast. Anyways, I have no memory really of what happened the rest of that night, but I remember the next morning waking up and my best friend Megan's mom, Jen, was at the house, and she was like such a saint during this time. If you're listening, Jen, shout out. But she was pretty much like on Skylar duty for the day, and so I think my parents probably needed some time alone to talk and work things out and plan on how we were going to get to Australia. But Megan's mom picked me up. She drove me to the school where I waited in the parking lot, and Megan and two of my other best friends came out to the parking lot to give me a hug. And it was just like a weird and confusing time, and they didn't know what to say, and I didn't know what to say. And then she drove me to the elementary school where my high school soccer coach at the time was also working there as a PE teacher. And we met my high school soccer coach in the parking lot of the elementary school. And she handed me my red Park City High School girls soccer rain jacket that we had been waiting all season for. It was like the most hyped up thing was to get this red rain jacket, and she knew that I was going to miss getting my jacket with the rest of the team, and so she gave me my red rain jacket, which something that felt so important the day before suddenly had no significance. But I got my rain jacket, I saw my friends, I went home, packed my suitcase, and that night we flew out of the Salt Lake City airport on our way to Australia. And I remember we had a layover in LAX, and we went to the Delta Lounge, and I just so vividly remember sitting on my phone in one of the chairs, and behind me, my parents were at the help counter begging this worker to find them a private room to call Sam's coaches. And my mom was crying, my dad was getting frustrated, and I just remember being embarrassed, like, oh my God, stop making a scene. Everyone's looking. And of course, in reality, like, who cares what other people are thinking? This is important. We need to communicate with his coaches and get an update. And I just remember my parents saying, like, please, we will literally go in the shower room, like the private shower room, and call his coaches. We just need a closed room to call his coaches. And I think that is exactly what they did. Anyways, then that night we got on the 14-hour flight to Australia, and I remember someone in the community had given us their Delta miles, and we all got upgraded to first class. And I remember walking on the plane and seeing our seat, and it was one of those lie down seats where you can sleep the whole flight laying down, and they bring you like 5 meals. And I just remember being so excited and thinking this was the coolest thing, and like wanting to take pictures and send it to all my friends, and then remembering like, oh wait, I'm not going on a tropical beach vacation in Delta One. I'm going to be at my brother's bedside in the hospital in Australia. And it was just a really weird, confusing feeling. Anyways, 14 hours later, we landed in Australia. And when we finally made it to Canberra, one of Sam's ski coaches picked us up at the airport. And he picked us up in a bright orange Perisher Resort Subaru that they had lended to the team to have while Sam was in the hospital. And I remember as we were driving to the hospital, he asked, like, should I drop you at the hotel? Should you get checked in? And my parents were like, absolutely not. Take us to see Sam immediately. And he said, like, I just want to warn you that you should be prepared for when you see Sam. It is going to be very hard to see Sam in his condition, and just like you should be prepared. And I think I just somehow was not understanding. I wasn't getting it. There was still part of me that thought he was going to be awake and sitting up in that bed. Like, I had yet to enter my Grey's Anatomy era, so I maybe didn't even fully understand what a coma was. But I remember walking into the hospital, getting on the elevator, and the doors opening to the ICU floor, and turning the corner and seeing Sam in his bed, and just like immediately my heart shattered, because it was not what I had expected. It was a million times worse than I could have ever imagined. And Sam was laying unconscious in a coma in a hospital bed with half of his head shaved because they had performed brain surgery and they didn't have time to shave the rest of it. And connected to so many tubes and wires and machines breathing for him. And it was just horrible to see the person who had been my hero my whole life, and who was always so strong and full of life and energy and jumping around and flipping off things, to see a 16-year-old kid in that condition is horrible. I think to see anyone in that condition is horrible. But Sam's entire ski team was there. They had been there the whole time, waiting by his bedside. And it was kind of weird. It's definitely, I think a lot of my experience in that hospital proved to me that the movies get it wrong pretty much 99% of the time. We were not in a private room. We were in the middle of a very busy ICU floor where beds were just separated by curtains, and there was nothing private about it at all. But I just remember seeing Sam, and my mom again immediately sobbing, my dad immediately sobbing, and me just like standing far away and not knowing what to do. And I remember my mom telling me, like, come hold his hand, and I was just like, this is so weird and unnatural, and it was horrible. Anyways, we spent the next 2 weeks there in Australia. We stayed at a local hotel, and it was honestly, like, we met the most amazing people in Australia. I think that's the only way we made it through this whole experience. the chefs who worked in the hotel restaurant made it their personal mission to start every day of ours with a smile. So they would make breakfast milkshakes for me every day. They made the most insane, like, waffles and whipped cream and syrup and fruit. And it was just like some really, really great people who were trying really hard to bring some light to our day. And for the next 2 weeks, we spent pretty much every single waking hour in the hospital next to Sam's bed. And it sucked. There's only so much you can do. I didn't even know how to grieve. I think, again, I was just so uncomfortable and awkward that people were seeing us in this vulnerable position. But I think I had mentioned in another episode that every single day I climbed into the hospital bed with Sam and read him the story of Little Babaji, one of our favorite childhood books. And so I had that time with Sam, which always made me happy. And I just remember every day, like, holding his hand and wishing a finger would twitch. And when it did, like, running to tell someone, like, oh my God, his finger twitched. What does this mean? Do something. And them just continuing to say, like, it doesn't mean anything. It's just, like, the body's reaction. It doesn't mean he's trying to talk to you, which was difficult to hear. And yeah, during that time, I completely fell behind in school. It was the first month of my freshman year in high school, and there was no part of me at all that was willing to focus on doing work or reading a book that wasn't the Little Babaji book. And I think my parents saw that, and the news from the doctors was, their opinion was, it looks like things are turning around. We think Sam is getting better. We think he is going to make it and he's going to wake up. And it was like the best news ever. And I remember my parents telling me that I was going to go home to Park City. They were going to stay with Sam. I was going to fly home, and they were going to come home with Sam. A week or two later, they were going to be flying in on like a helicopter, a private jet, and they were going to bring Sam home, and he was going to be awake and everything was going to be better. And that's exactly what we all thought was going to happen. And so after 2.5 weeks in Australia, I got back on a plane, this time not first class. That was a rude awakening. Flew 14 hours back home, and I got home and tried to resume normal life and go back to school, and it was just super weird. By that point, the entire town knew. The whole town had rallied behind us. They had been planning candlelight vigils and fundraisers and GoFundMes, and everyone was wearing gold ribbons at school for Sam, and people had started printing like Live Like Sam bracelets, and it was huge, and it was in the news, and there was this giant poster, banner, whatever it was, like in our whole driveway that people were stopping by and signing, and it was a lot, and it was very overwhelming. And in a small town like Park City, there was no hiding from that. And so I remember just being so stressed to go back to school, and going back and someone immediately asking me in my first period class if it was true that my brother had been attacked by a shark in Australia. And pretty much was just like, this sucks. I'm over it. I have no desire to learn. Get me the hell out of here. And that night, it was at the end of my first week back at school, my parents called me and said, we've decided that we actually want you here. We don't know why we sent you home. You should be here. And we're having you get back on a plane, and you're coming back to Australia to be with us. And there was no conversation of like, this is good news, this is bad news, this is what, it was just like, we want you here. We shouldn't have sent you away. And I wanted nothing to do with school. So I was more than happy to get back on that flight and go back to Australia. And so a week later, got back on that 14-hour flight, flew back to Australia. And again, I think I was so hopeful that I was going to get there and everything was going to be okay, and Sam was awake, and this was like a surprise. They didn't want to tell me. And instead, it was the worst case scenario. I got back to Australia. and went right to the hospital. And I remember my parents and our social worker, Beck, who we love Beck, they took me into one of those little family waiting rooms. And I think anyone who has lost someone probably has been in one of those family waiting rooms. It is private and has uncomfortable furniture and is meant for hard conversations. And Beck and my dad were sitting in 2 chairs across from me, and I was on a couch with my mom, and she had her hand on my thigh. And I just remember they said, "We have some bad news. It isn't looking like Sam is going to wake up anymore. We have consulted an ungodly amount of doctors, from the very talented doctors in this hospital to doctors at the best hospitals in the US, and the consensus is the same all around, that Sam is brain dead, and that even if he were to wake up, he would never live the life that he wanted to live and the life that he was so happy to be living." And I think for me, that was what I really took from it, is like, even if eventually one day Sam were to wake up, he would not be the Sam that we love and know. He would not be the Sam that he wanted to be. He would not have his humor. He would not have his body. He would not be able to fly and soar through the air and be untouchable and do these incredible things. And that is not the life that Sam would have wanted, and that's not the life that we wanted for Sam. And it was pretty clear that he was not ever going to wake up. And so ultimately, under the guidance of our doctors, it was decided that he would be removed from life support and from the tubes and the pumps and the everything that was keeping him alive. Even though physically he was still there, every other part of him was gone. He was no longer there. And that was a very tough reality to accept. And I just remember sobbing in that room, my parents sobbing. Yeah. It is that was a decision that I hope no family ever has to make, a conversation that no family should ever have to have. But unfortunately, we had to. And so that day, Sam was moved to a private room with a view of the city and windows everywhere. And on his last night, we wheeled him out onto the rooftop deck of the hospital, and it was like this cool, crisp night. It was perfect out, and we had a bunch of like electric tea candles all around, and they just left us alone to be with Sam and to say goodbye. And this is the part that really is nothing like the movies. We were out there with Sam on that roof for hours, and it was brutal. There were moments where, I don't want to get into too much detail, but there were moments where like you trick your brain into thinking there's about to be a miracle and he's about to wake up. And it was a lot of conflicting emotions of like trying to convince myself to say goodbye, but also just like praying for a miracle, praying that he was going to wake up. And after several hours, that time eventually came, and he took his last breath, and he was gone. And on that roof of the Canberra hospital at very late in the evening, I became an only child. And we said goodbye to Sam forever. And it was horrible, and it was awful. But it was also beautiful in a way to be there with my family and to be able to say goodbye to Sam. Anyways, At the end of that night, we were exhausted. My mom and I went home at the time. Some very nice local couple had given us their home to stay in while they were traveling. My mom and I went back to that home, and unfortunately my dad had to stay at the hospital because even though there was no like crime committed or big accident, my dad had to give a police report and sign a death certificate. And so we went home that night, and I have no memory. I don't even know how we got there. And the next morning we woke up and sat down together on the couch, and the three of us crafted the Facebook message that we were going to put out to the world, who had been rooting for Sam for over 20 days, who had been sending us love every day, who had been raising thousands of dollars and sending prayers and thinking of Sam and sending us words of encouragement. And we crafted a Facebook message where we announced to the world that Sam had passed away. And I don't know how, but some people somehow found out before the rest of the world. And I remember someone had gone to Sam's Facebook page and posted RIP on his timeline before we got to make that announcement as a family. And that just pissed me off so much that someone thought they deserved that opportunity more than us. Anyways, and then just a few minutes after that, one of my soccer teammates called me and was telling me all about this crazy fight at the game and how she almost got in this like huge fist fight with another player, and it was insane and everyone was going wild. And I could hear all my other teammates in the background, and then she said, "Oh, by the way, how's Sam?" And I froze and immediately started sobbing, and I told her that he had died the night before. And she immediately started sobbing, and I heard all of my teammates sobbing behind her. And that was the very first person that I ever had to tell that my brother had died, and it was the first of many from there on, but it was just so horrible to have to deliver that news to someone else, especially because our whole town had been so, like, they had seriously rallied behind us so much. They were rooting for Sam, they were rooting for us, and so I just know, obviously, as heartbroken as I was, it broke so many other people's hearts to hear that news. And I wish we had gotten to tell more people ourselves. I hate that some people, probably some of his very close friends, had to find out through the internet, and that is awful. I don't know. I don't know how else we could have done it. But once we got through that was the hardest part of that day. And then I remember I walked out to the kitchen and I looked at my mom and I said, like, "Hey Mom, can I ask you a question?" And she just said, "You want to get a tattoo, don't you?" She immediately knew. And a few days later, we did just that. We took a ferry to Sydney and we went to the Manly Tattoo Parlor in Sydney. And I sat down at 14 years old, and I remember wearing a dress thinking it was going to make me look older and more mature, and they clocked it right away. They knew for a fact that I was not old enough to be getting a tattoo. But my dad explained the situation, that my brother had just died and I was getting a tattoo for him, and they made an exception. The tattoo artist was actually also named Skylar, spelled the same as me, which my dad, who was not loving the tattoo idea, took that as a sign and decided himself to get a tattoo as well. So I got an infinity symbol that says Sam in it, and it has 3 birds above it, and my dad got the most sick skiing kangaroo on his shoulder, which is pretty cool. But later that week, we got back on a plane home from Australia for the last time. We had Sam's ski bag with us and all of his clothes. And we flew home to Park City. We arrived to open arms to a house full of baked goods and frozen meals, and my whole soccer team, every single girl on the team had gotten me a gift. My room was just full of gifts. And came home and immediately started planning Sam's celebration of life. And I kind of like threw myself at that role, and I wanted to be involved, and I wanted to plan his celebration of life. And 10 days after Sam had died, Sam passed away on October 1st, 2015. On October 10th, 10/10, we had Sam's celebration of life, which was attended by over 1,400 people at the Utah Olympic Park. And it was just the most beautiful, amazing thing you have ever seen. And there was no doubt in my mind that Sam was there that night, witnessing it all, making little things happen, sending signs from him. Yeah, it was just crazy that 1,400 people, not only from the community, but from all over the country, came there to be with our family and to celebrate Sam and to say goodbye to Sam. And it was just truly the most beautiful showing of community that I will probably ever see in my life. And at the end of that night, it was like that chapter of our story had closed, and very clearly the next chapter had opened, because we had this whole community rallied behind us who wanted to support us. And from there, it was just up to us to decide what to do with that community and what to do with Sam's legacy. So that is the story of how I lost my brother Sam. And I definitely missed a million details, like the fact that Sam's best friend Joe was also there in Australia with us. But that's all I've got right now. I think I'll probably do a part 2 of this story eventually, but as I come up on the 10-year anniversary of losing Sam, less than 15 days away from that date now, I reflect a lot on those days in the hospital and how those were the worst days of my life, but how I'm also so grateful that I got those extra days with Sam. Even though he couldn't talk back to me, he couldn't hug me back, squeeze my hand back, I can't imagine it any other way. And I just feel so grateful that we got to see Sam and be with him on his last day. And I still feel his presence and his spirit so much, and I don't know. Anyways, thank you for listening to this episode and for holding space for me to share my story. If you have ever lost someone, you know that there are moments that stay burned into your memory forever. Some parts of grief just never heal, and that maybe means they aren't meant to heal. They're just part of the love we carry. And just remember, you are not alone in this. I feel less alone because of this community every day, and I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. So, thank you for being here. We will talk soon.